Groups are getting breached because their firewall was misconfigured. Groups are getting breached because their email was misconfigured. Exploitable vulnerabilities on computers and servers and firewalls are only being detected on a quarterly or an annual basis, which is basically useless.
Cyber should even be greater because, when you're larger, you can mitigate risk to some degree, even financially. But if you're a smaller organization, it's much harder. If you're shut down for a month, you're done. So if you're not seeing patients, there's nothing left, right? This is not a size issue to me. I think it's an industry issue.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Dental Truth Project. We are very excited for our episode today, but before we introduce our guests, we're going to have Ken do our Ask Ken segment.
All right. Thanks, Talon. And I'm very excited for today's episode as well, so I'll be quick with this. So here's the question that came in from one of the listeners. The question was, at what point does adding more locations actually start destroying value instead of creating it? Now, I'm going to introduce very quickly a concept, and it is operational leverage. So to the degree your capabilities and your everything that it takes to run all of your dental practices, to the degree that they have capacity to support an additional practice, that's when you can start to say, hey, we can start to grow to another location or another location. And it takes a minute. You've got to stop and you've got to really assess what's going on inside the business. Are your regional managers just completely tapped out, or do they have capacity? And there's just so many other things in terms of when you want to add a new locations. You do not want to outrun what you can handle operationally. And so long as you keep that as your guardrail, most of the time you'll be okay, and you won't get too ahead of yourself on your skis, so to speak. All right, I'll pass it back to you, Down.
Awesome. Thank you, Ken, for that. Now, today we have two guests. We have Ginny Jones, the CEO of Village Family Dental, and then we also have Gary Salman, the CEO of Black Talon Security, one of our premier cybersecurity companies here in the dental industry. Both of them are joining us today. So we're going to pass this off to Ginny now to share her truth with us, but then Gary's going to be here as a supporter and will chime in as necessary. So Jenny, we want to hear from you. This is the Dental Truth Project. What is the truth that you have to share with us today?
Yeah, thanks, Talon. Thanks, Ken, for having me on. Of course, Gary. So I think my truth and our practice's truth is that the things that are not sexy about running an organization our size are the things like compliance, like your IT, like cybersecurity, like HIPAA. Nobody wants to talk about it, but at the end of the day, those are the things that will ruin your business. So it's really important that your top executives focus on those things every single day, not just once a year, not when you just have an incident, but definitely every single day.
So, Jenny, tell us about how do you go about bringing compliance to the table? Because it can definitely be a dry topic from time to time, or people can say, we just did this training 5 weeks ago. What are we doing here? How do you implement that into your overall culture?
Yeah, and it is a daily process. It is a daily conversation that we have, like every huddle, every morning. There is some topic that we are talking about. We even talk about particularly things as it relates to Gary and Black Talon, who are amazing. Just topics that they bring to us every day. One of the things that we're just chatting about is how, particularly in cybersecurity, that if you are near a military base, for example, that you can easily be a target in your business. That's not something we knew, but we tell people that we're constantly having open communication about how these things can happen. And same thing about protecting people's privacy. And it's all tied together. So it's not just a once a year meeting. We're talking about it all the time. And it's not fun. It's not like about recruiting a doctor or talking about how you beat production numbers for the day. But at the end of the day, if we got through and we had no complaints, then that's one of the top 3 items.
Yeah, I relate to this topic so much. Gary knows this, but my degree is actually in cybersecurity. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about cyber, talking about cyber, and the biggest problem is it's always preventative. The conversation is about something that could happen. And so any dollar investment that you make into cybersecurity or compliance, I'd say those two are even a little bit different than IT, because You've got to have
Yeah.
computers and servers and a network in order to run your business. Like that's an operational expense. You can't make money if that's not there. But cybersecurity and compliance, they don't impact top line revenue. It's not like marketing spend where, you up that expense and then you can see your production and collection values increase. It's just impacting bottom line revenue. It's just an expense. And even if you spend tons and tons of money on compliance and cybersecurity, you're not going to see more patients come from it. With the exception that if there's a disaster, if
Right.
you get audited, if there's a problem,
Yeah.
then things are going to tank. But for small business owners, when their like margins are tight and they're really trying to run their business, like every day you're kind of betting on, is it going to happen to me today? Is it going to happen to me today? Is it going to happen to me today? And most of the time people just try to fly under the radar as long as they can, betting that it's not going to happen to them today until eventually it does. I don't know, Gary, you probably see a lot of that mentality. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I think that's kind of my definition of the broken mindset where, it's easy to say it's not going to happen. And I think we have this under control, right? And we have tools in place. And then all of a sudden there's an event, right? And events can be anything from an email compromise, which could be really bad, right? A hacker gets into an administrator's account for the email and take over the entire email system. They get into a doctor's email or, even an executive, right, of a DSO or a group, and they're reading all these confidential emails, maybe about M&A and things like that, or they're about to close on a transaction, and all of a sudden, magically, the wiring instructions change right before the closure, and the money gets wired to a threat actor. We see these types of things all the time. These aren't really theoretical, but the whole industry is really moving to what is a relatively new concept, I'll say, within the last 12 months. And we've been talking about this and we're actually doing it with our clients now. And I think you guys kind of just touched on it, maybe even inadvertently, but there's a concept called CTEM, which is continuous threat exposure management. And because things are moving, and Ginny's doing this, she probably wasn't even aware of it. I mean, part of CTEM is having visibility and having those discussions almost daily. So, with Ginny and her teams doing these huddles in the morning and maybe talking about the latest cyber threats or compliance issues, regulatory stuff, right? She's doing this on a continuous basis, not like, hey, we checked the box for the year, we're trying to be compliant. The exact same concept applies for threat mitigation. And actually, there's really a direct correlation with the increase in the usage of AI by threat actors. But really what CTEM is talking about is evaluating your technology from a security perspective every single day, almost in near real time. So what we're really seeing now is, groups are getting breached because their firewall was misconfigured. Groups are getting breached because their email was configured. Exploitable vulnerabilities on computers and servers and firewalls are only being detected on a quarterly or an annual basis, which is basically useless. So the things that we're doing at Black Talon say, we know that doesn't work. It's ineffective. How do we do this daily? So for folks like Ginny, who utilizes our platform, we're hitting all of her firewalls every single day, simulating an attack against them, and then, providing that type of information back to Ginny's IT resources and her executive team, showing, hey, here's what we're doing, here are the things we're finding, and these are real world risks that have to be addressed, in near real world time, right? Because we're dealing with AI, which is accelerating these attacks to almost 0 seconds. Like literally, that's how quickly it's moving.
Wow.
And I think one of the biggest things, and Ginny kind of mentioned this, is the executive team has to own cybersecurity and compliance, right? I think pushing it downstream to managers or directors often causes a problem because those individuals are often making decisions that aren't in the best interest for the organization, and the C-suite is left blind. And then when there is an event, then all of a sudden the questions start, flying like, hey, how did you not bring this to our attention? Or if you had mentioned that this was a high risk, of course we would have invested in this technology. And I think that's the problem right now is a lack of technical visibility, right through this continuous testing and evaluation of the infrastructure to make sure it's, I'll say, not say that this type of testing makes things less susceptible, nothing zero risk. But the reality is you have to have this type of visibility. You have to have these vulnerability tests. You have to have pen testing, and you have to have all these other things being done to your network because the hackers are doing it without your permission.
Yeah, we've had through our relationship and working with Black Talon, we have what we call the hot sheet, and basically it's folks that have clicked links they shouldn't have within our platform, and we have names and we address those people. And typically it's me personally. I will go to a practice and I will get right in front of them and say, hey, look, you showed up on this list. It's not some place that people want to be. And I'm, we always do it with kindness, but it's like, hey, we had this and it showed up under your ID and this is what you clicked. And I think people also appreciate it because sometimes they still don't understand like what does a fake email or phishing email actually kind of look like. We tell them. Gary has wonderful training that we do. One of the things too, Ken, how we also implement on our practice, like every single hire has to have this training even before they log on to any computer. They all learn what a technical timeout is, and everybody talks about technical timeouts. But so I think it's being very mission driven to make sure that everybody is aware. And then I think down to one of the things you said, it's got an expense. It's not an expense. It is an investment, and we have to change our language, and the executives have to change their language around it. Just because it is an investment and a protection of your business, because the alternative is not to have it and then have an event that becomes a crisis, and it's not a month. It's not 6 months. It can be years of impact to your business. So I think that was probably, with my thoughts there. And then the other thing is that cyber versus IT, I think it's something that a lot of us lay people don't understand, but that's absolutely true. Is that make sure you have a cyber expert on your team. Your IT team is phenomenal. I'm sure that every business in dental thinks they have these wonderful IT people. But cyber is a very specialized training, and being able to have partners with our great IT team like Black Talon to make sure they're that extension of what we need.
That's awesome.
Man,
One thing I just want to
go
mention
ahead, Jen.
yeah, Jenny, one thing I just want to mention that I really appreciate is sometimes as a leader, you just have to lead. And in the instance of this, you have to set the tone, because otherwise, if it's not important to you and the employees can't tell that it's important to you, then it's not going to be important to them. And I'll say this too, like, I'm sure that sometimes you feel like you talk about it until you're blue in the face, and then still somebody, hits a phishing, attack, or, something like that happens. But it really has to start with the leader and to set the tone and to get everybody aligned, because otherwise everybody's like, why are we doing this training again? Why are we doing this? And what I'm so busy, I don't have time for this. But if the leader steps up and leads, it creates the right environment and the right culture so that the team understands the value of it. So I was excited to hear about how you approach that with your team. It's awesome.
Well,
Really
and I think even if yes, we're a large group practice, that's what we are, and 14 locations, and we've got 400 employees. But your leader is also your dentist, is that provider that's needed every day. And even if you're a smaller practice and it's just your one team, to me, their thought process around cyber should even be greater, because, when you're larger, you can mitigate risk to some degree, even financially, operationally. But if you're a smaller organization, it's a much harder. If you're shut down for a month, it can be catastrophic. I mean, you're done. So if you're not seeing patients, there's nothing left, right? So I think that's the thing too, is that this is not a size issue. To me, I think it's an industry issue, quite frankly, because dentistry typically has kind of been slow to the game of dealing with some of these protections in HIPAA and cyber compared to like a hospital system or whatever.
Yeah, like large medical group for sure. Right. And the government doesn't really differentiate. They don't care if you're an orthopedic group, a dental group, or behavioral. Like the laws are the laws, the rules are the rules, and the states, treat them equally. And I think in dentistry, Ginny, you're spot on, right? I would argue that dentistry is probably 3 or 4 years behind from a cyber perspective, right? They're still using generic basic tools to defend their networks. They're not engaging in cyber companies like you see in the medical space. They're not separating duties, which is so critical, right? One of the things that I always ask when I lecture live is a show of hands from the audience. And I'll ask them, okay, so who's ever sat down with their IT vendor and the IT vendor has pushed a piece of paper in front of them and said, hey, Dr. Smith or, Mary, the CEO, here are all of the problems we have from a security perspective with the network that we built for you and maintain, right? Who's ever sat down and had that conversation? And every now and then you get a couple of hands. And when you dig into it, those are the folks that have probably had a prior cyber event that they're now, realizing, oh crap, I thought my IT group had this, or they're a large group that truly understands, the specialization and the need to separate that. And the interesting thing is I lecture with a lot of attorneys that are data privacy counsel, right? They work specifically on cyber events, and pretty much all of them are kind of saying the same thing right now, which is you have to rethink how you're handling your IT and cyber, and they should be two different firms, right? So you have those true checks and balances going on versus, the typical scenario, which is, oh, we're fine, we're good. Someone told me, from my IT company or managed service provider, we got this. And there's no visibility into risk, right? And one of the things that I always like to mention is, and this is right up both of your alleys, right? Everything you guys do revolves around data and financials and KPIs and analysis. And then when I ask a very simple question, like if you had to gauge your cyber risk on a scale of 1 to 100, where are you? And, the typical answer is crickets. They don't know how to answer that. But I think we should be thinking like Ginny gets a cyber risk rating from us, for her organization globally, as well as all of her locations. So within seconds, as a leader, she can go in there and be like, oh, these 12 locations are awesome. What the heck's going on with this one? We just acquired it. Why isn't their security, up to par with the rest of our offices? So as a leader, she can immediately, make phone calls, make, decisions on what has to happen there based on additional information, but she has the telemetry or the data to see that now, right? She doesn't have to be super technical, but she just needs to know how to look at charts and graphs and make a similar analysis that you would do when you're looking at a P&L or something like that.
So red or green. I don't even have to have that. It's like red or green.
Red or green, yeah. What shade of purple are we today, right? Yeah.
Which is super useful because in the division of responsibility in an organization, not everyone can or should be a cyber expert. And so when you've got those levels of abstraction so that the key decision makers have the data that they need to give training and correction and make decisions about the cyber health of the organization, they can do so without needing the finer technical details. I have to say, I've been super impressed with everything we've talked about today. This is clearly the gold standard that we've laid out and all the necessary frameworks that must be in place for a dental organization to be truly prepared. As we're starting to wrap up the episode here, I think my final question for you, Ginny, is if I were the owner of, let's say, a 3-location group, so just starting out right on the beginning of my journey, and you and I were having this conversation, and I was hesitant about setting up some cybersecurity measures because it's super expensive and my IT has it under control. As we close up this episode, what would be your parting advice to me about what I should do?
Oh, yeah. So number one, call your insurance agent and make sure you have cyber insurance policy. It's a separate thing than your regular policies. Number two, you call a company like Black Talon. Of course, Black Talon focuses in our industry and has been amazing and very accessible and kind of dumb it down, as we say. So make the phone call to the third-party cyber company, management company that can help you protect your systems. And then number three is get everybody in your organization on board that they are all parts of spokes on the wheel to make sure that the practice is protected. That would be my message.
Awesome.
Nice.
Sounds good. Well, Gary and Ginny, thank you very much for coming on. And to all of our listeners, thanks for listening and have a great day.
Thanks for having us.
Guys, thank you.